What happened? How?
Silas Vane, a loan shark. He's after a journal.
The heavy velvet curtains didn't dull the sound of the glass shattering, a crystalline scream that echoed my own. I hit the floor of the lounge, the plush carpet soaking up the warmth of the blood blooming across my shoulder like a dark, macabre rose. Rain, mixed with crimson, dripped from my fingertips onto marble that probably cost more than everything I'd ever owned. The Gilded Cage, New York's most exclusive after-hours establishment, where politicians made deals over cigars and syndicate kings divided territories like carving up a birthday cake. I had no business being here. I knew that with the same burning certainty, I knew the bullet lodged in my shoulder was from Silas Vane's favorite hitman. But his men were circling the block outside, and this was the only building in Midtown with champagne gold light still glowing through the windows at 3 o'clock in the morning. My vision swam at the edges. My teeth were stained red from biting through the pain, and the leather-bound ledger I'd stolen was slick with blood where I clutched it against my ribs. Every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. You have precisely 10 seconds to explain why you just destroyed a window that's older than your entire bloodline before I decide you're not worth the bullet. The voice rolled out from the shadows near the bar, smooth as expensive bourbon and just as likely to burn going down. I lurched toward it, my free hand fumbling for the switchblade in my pocket despite knowing I could barely stand. That's when he emerged from the cigar smoke, and despite the pain screaming through my body, I forgot how to breathe. Randolph Benitez. Every hustler, dealer, and detective in Manhattan knew that name, whispered it like a prayer or a curse, depending on which side of his mercy you stood. He controlled the entire West Side, from the docks to the Diamond District, and rumor had it he'd never broken a promise or shown mercy twice. I'd moved through the edges of his world for years, working collections for smaller fish, and every single street boss had given me the same gospel. Never lie to Randolph Benitez. Never cross Randolph Benitez. And for the love of God, never bring your problems to Randolph Benitez's door. He stood over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered in a 3-piece suit that probably cost more than my yearly rent. The jacket was discarded somewhere, his vest unbuttoned, the crisp white shirt beneath rolled to his elbows and exposing forearms marked with ink that told stories of violence and power. His tie hung loose around his neck. Dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite. All sharp angles and unforgiving lines. But his eyes, God, his eyes were chips of obsidian, cold and fathomless as they swept over me with the kind of focus that made you feel like prey. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother and my friends said I wouldn't reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show them that these tales matter. Those eyes narrowed as they landed on the wound in my shoulder, on the ledger pressed against my side, and something shifted in his expression. Dangerous recognition, like a predator spotting something unexpected in its territory. I asked you a question, he said, but his voice had changed. The death threat was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. Curiosity. The gun in his hand, a pristine silver piece that looked like art, lowered by inches. Not holstered, not safe, just considering. I forced myself to stand straighter, even though my legs were shaking and my vision was going gray at the edges. The ledger felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Around me, the Gilded Cage lived up to its name. All gold fixtures and crystal chandeliers, velvet booths and artwork that belonged in museums. A prison of luxury, and I just crashed into it like a bleeding, desperate ghost. Silas Vane wants me dead, I managed, my voice raw and strange to my own ears. But I have something that could destroy him first. I held up the ledger, and blood smeared across the embossed leather. I'm Linda Blair, and I'm here to make you an offer you'd be a fool to refuse. Randolph Benitez stared at me for a long moment, and I couldn't tell if he was deciding how to kill me or how to use me. Then, slowly, deliberately, he clicked the safety back on his gun and slid it into the holster beneath his vest. You've got 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't throw you back out onto the street where you belong, he said. But he was already moving toward me, his footsteps silent on the carpet, his shadow falling over me like a sentence being passed. I met his eyes and refused to look away, even though everything in me screamed to run, to beg, to collapse. Because I'm the only person in this city who can give you what Silas Vane has spent a decade hiding, I said. And because if you let me bleed out on your expensive floor, you'll never know what you could have had. Something almost like a smile ghosted across his face. Almost. That, he said quietly, reaching out to take the ledger from my trembling hands, was the right answer. The world tilted. My knees buckled. And the last thing I remembered before the darkness took me was Randolph Benitez catching me before I hit the ground, his arms impossibly strong, his voice a low command that echoed through the golden cage. Get the doctor! And lock the doors. No one comes in. No one goes out. Please subscribe to Julia's Romance Library, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. I woke up in silk sheets that smelled like sandalwood and danger. My shoulder had been stitched, bandaged, and the pain had dulled to a distant throb. But the real shock came when I opened my eyes and saw him. Randolph Benitez, seated in a leather chair beside the bed, the stolen ledger open in his hands, and a look on his face that told me everything had changed. Welcome back, Miss Blair, he said, closing the book with deliberate care. We have much to discuss, starting with why Silas Vane is willing to burn down half of Manhattan to get this back, and ending with exactly what you expect me to do about it. What happened in that room would set the course for everything that followed. The bargain we struck, the rules he broke, the empire we would build on the ashes of the men who hunted me. But that story, the real story of how a bleeding stranger became the queen of the gilded cage, that's a journey you'll have to take with me. Stay with me through what comes next, through the deals made in shadow and the blood spilled in golden light, through every moment Randolph Benitez chose me over his sacred code, because this is only the beginning. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. The room came into focus slowly, like surfacing from deep water. My shoulder screamed with every breath, but the pain was manageable now, dulled by whatever they'd given me. I was lying on something soft, a bed, I realized, with sheets that felt like liquid against my skin. The air smelled of expensive cigars and something darker, more primal. Leather, gunpowder, power. I tried to sit up and found my wrists weren't bound, which surprised me. What didn't surprise me was the gun pointed directly at my chest. Randolph Benitez sat in a wingback chair at the foot of the bed, perfectly still, perfectly patient. He'd removed his vest, and his white shirt was unbuttoned further now, revealing more of the intricate tattoos that mapped his chest. A serpent coiled around a crown. Latin words I couldn't quite make out. The gun in his hand, that same silver masterpiece, rested casually against his knee, barrel trained on my heart with the kind of precision that told me he never missed. The doctor says you'll live, he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade through silk. Whether you do or not depends entirely on the next 5 minutes. I pushed myself up against the headboard, ignoring the way my vision swam. The ledger sat on the table beside him, closed now, but I could see the bloodstains I'd left on the cover. My blood. My ticket out of hell or straight into a deeper one. Then I suggest you stop wasting time and start asking questions, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Something flickered in those obsidian eyes. Amusement, maybe. Or respect. It was hard to tell with a man like him. You broke into my establishment. You brought a war to my doorstep. And you're holding leverage against one of the most dangerous men in this city. He leaned forward, slightly, the gun never wavering. Most people in your position would be begging for their lives right now. Why aren't you? Because begging won't keep me alive, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. You're either going to kill me or use me. Crying won't change which one you choose. The corner of his mouth lifted, Not quite a smile, but close. He stood then, and the movement was fluid, predatory. He crossed to the bed in 3 strides, the gun still pointed at me, and I forced myself not to shrink back. This close, I could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, could smell the tobacco and expensive cologne that clung to him. "Tell me about Silas Vane," he commanded. "He's a parasite," I said. "He runs debt collection for half the loan sharks in New York, but he's been skimming, building his own empire on the side. That ledger has every name, every payment, every dirty deal he's made for the last 3 years. And you stole it." "I earned it," I corrected. "I worked collections for him for 2 years. Watched him bleed people dry, destroy families, murder anyone who got too close to his secrets. That ledger is insurance. Proof. Power. If you've made it this far, thank you for being here. Before we continue, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love knowing this story is reaching people across the world. Feel free to share your thoughts on Linda and Randolph so far. What would you do in her position? And don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to Julia's Romance Library. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Thank you. Randolph studied me for a long moment, and I could see the calculations happening behind those dangerous eyes. He was weighing my worth, measuring my usefulness, deciding if I was a weapon or a liability. "Why come to me?" he finally asked. "Because Silas is afraid of you," I said simply. "Everyone is. You're the only person in this city with enough power to make him back off. And because—" I hesitated, then pushed forward, "because I heard you have rules. Codes. You don't hurt civilians. You keep your word. In a world full of monsters, you're the closest thing to a king with honor." The gun lowered, not holstered, but no longer aimed at my heart. Randolph's expression was unreadable, but something had shifted in the air between us. "You know nothing about my honor," he said quietly, dangerously. "Then prove me wrong," I challenged. "Throw me out. Let Silas's men tear me apart. Show me that all those stories about the great Randolph Benitez were just fairy tales for cowards." For a moment, I thought I'd pushed too far. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Then, he did something I didn't expect. He laughed, a low, dark sound that raised goosebumps on my skin. "You have a death wish, Miss Blair." "I have survival instincts," I corrected. "And they're telling me that you're my best chance at staying alive long enough to destroy the man who's been hunting me." Randolph holstered his gun finally, and I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He picked up the ledger, thumbed through a few pages, and I watched his expression darken as he read. "These names," he said, "some of them are mine. My businesses. My people. Silas has been moving into your territory," I confirmed. "Slowly, carefully, building leverage so that when he finally makes his move, you won't see it coming." The rage that crossed Randolph's face was cold, calculated, deadly. This wasn't a man who exploded in anger. He was a man who cataloged grievances and repaid them with surgical precision. He closed the ledger and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You want protection. I want Silas Vane's empire in ashes. It seems we have the foundation for an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" I asked carefully. "The kind where you stay alive," he said, moving toward the door. "And I get everything I need to end the man who dared to steal from me." He paused at the threshold, looking back over his shoulder. "Rest, Miss Blair. Tomorrow, your real education begins." The door closed behind him with a soft click, and I was alone in the golden cage. My shoulder throbbed. My future was uncertain. But for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't running. I was standing still, and somehow, that felt even more dangerous. I woke to the sound of ice clinking in a glass and the sharp scent of antiseptic cutting through the room's expensive cologne. Dawn light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the private quarters in shades of gold and shadow. I'd been moved again while I slept or passed out, more likely. This room was different from the bedroom. Smaller, more intimate. A study, perhaps, with bookshelves lining the walls and a massive mahogany desk that looked like it had witnessed a century of sins. Randolph stood at a sidebar, pouring amber liquid into crystal tumblers. He'd changed clothes, now wore dark slacks and a black button-down with the sleeves rolled up, exposing those tattooed forearms. Without his jacket, he looked less like a king and more like something primal. Dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with guns or power. "Your stitches need changing," he said without turning around. "The doctor will be back this afternoon, but you were bleeding through the bandage." "You're not a doctor," I said, my voice rough from sleep and pain. "No." He turned, carrying both glasses, and handed me one. "But I've put enough bullets in people to know how to take them out. Drink. It'll help with the pain." I took the glass, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. The whiskey burned going down, but he was right, it dulled the edges. Randolph set his own glass aside and retrieved a medical kit from a drawer in his desk, the movements practiced and efficient. "Sit up," he commanded, "and take off the shirt." Heat crawled up my neck, but I wasn't about to show weakness now. I set the glass on the side table and carefully pulled the borrowed shirt. His shirt, I realized, over my head, leaving me in just a thin undershirt that was already stained with blood. The bandage on my shoulder was soaked through, angry red seeping across white gauze. Randolph moved behind me, and I felt the bed dip under his weight. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he peeled away the old bandage, revealing the ugly wound beneath. The bullet had gone clean through, which was the only mercy Silas's hitman had granted me. "You should be dead," Randolph said quietly, his breath warm against my bare shoulder. 2 inches to the left, and you would be. "Luck?" I managed through gritted teeth as he cleaned the wound with antiseptic that felt like liquid fire. "I don't believe in luck, Miss Blair. I believe in calculated risks and survival instincts." He began wrapping fresh gauze with practiced precision. "You knew exactly where to run, exactly whose door to break down. That wasn't luck. That was strategy." I stayed silent as he worked, hyper-aware of his proximity, of the way his hands moved across my skin, clinical but not cold, of the heat radiating from his body and the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Tell me about the ledger," he said. "All of it. Not just Silas's movements into my territory. Everything. If you're still with me at this point, thank you for investing in Linda's journey. Before we dive deeper, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what you think of the chemistry between these two. Are you Team Randolph, or do you think Linda should run while she still can? Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe. Every subscriber tells me these stories matter. Thanks for being part of this. I took another sip of whiskey, letting it fortify me. Silas keeps 2 sets of books. The one he shows his bosses and the real one. That ledger is the real one. It has payoffs to cops, judges, city officials. It has the names of every business he's bleeding dry, every protection racket he's running. It has offshore accounts, shell companies, money laundering operations that stretch from New York to Miami. Randolph's hands stilled against my shoulder. "How much?" 17 million. That's what he skimmed over 3 years. That's what he's used to build his empire in the shadows while everyone thought he was just a mid-level enforcer. And the names in my territory: 8 businesses, 3 of your dock workers, a shipment route he's been using to move heroin without your knowledge. I turned my head slightly, meeting his eyes over my shoulder. "He's been stealing from you for 18 months, Randolph, building his power on your blind spots." The rage that flickered across his face was volcanic, barely contained. His jaw clenched, and I watched the muscle jump beneath his skin. But his hands remained gentle as he finished bandaging my shoulder, securing the gauze with medical tape. "Why didn't you go to the police?" he asked. I laughed, the sound bitter. "Half of them are in that ledger. The other half would sell me to Silas before I finished filing the report." The law doesn't protect people like me. It protects people like him. And you think I'm different? I turned to face him fully now, ignoring the pull of pain in my shoulder. I think you're a king who doesn't tolerate thieves in his kingdom. I think you're a man who keeps his word, even when it costs you. And I hesitated, then pushed forward. I think you're the only person in this city who can make Silas pay for everything he's done. Randolph studied me with those fathomless dark eyes, and I couldn't tell what he was thinking. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached out and brushed a strand of hair away from my face. The gesture was so unexpectedly tender that it stole my breath. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, he said softly, or the most foolish. I haven't decided which. Can't I be both? I whispered. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile. Get dressed. You're moving to the estate today. If Silas wants you, he'll have to go through every man I command. And Miss Blair, his voice dropped to something dark and promising, no one takes what belongs to me. The weight of those words hung in the air between us, electric and dangerous. I wasn't sure if he meant the ledger or something else entirely. But as he stood and walked toward the door, leaving me alone with my racing heart and fresh bandages, I realized it didn't matter. I'd made my deal with the devil, and there was no turning back now. The estate sat on the edge of the city, like a crown jewel overlooking its kingdom. Wrought iron gates opened to reveal a mansion that belonged in old European fairy tales. All stone and ivy, with towers that pierced the gray morning sky. As Randolph's Blacktown car rolled up the circular drive, I pressed my face closer to the tinted window, feeling like I'd fallen through a portal into another world. This is excessive, I murmured. This is necessary, Randolph corrected from beside me. He'd been on his phone for most of the drive, issuing orders in that low, commanding voice that made grown men scramble. Now he pocketed the device and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Silas will be watching the gilded cage. He'll be watching my usual safe houses. He won't think to look for you here. Because you never bring civilians to your home, I said, remembering the street wisdom I'd learned over the years. It's one of your rules. Keep business separate from your personal life. Never let them see where you sleep. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe, that I knew him so well without ever having met him before 2 days ago. Rules exist for a reason, and yet you're breaking this one. I'm making an exception. He opened the car door as his driver pulled to a stop. You hold information worth more than most of my business ventures. It's strategic to keep you close. I followed him out of the car, and the cold morning air bit at my skin. Strategic. Business. I told myself that's all it was, even as I felt the weight of his gaze on me, even as I remembered the tenderness in his hands when he'd changed my bandages. The inside of the mansion was even more breathtaking than the exterior. Marble floors reflected the light from crystal chandeliers. Paintings that belonged in museums lined the walls. A grand staircase curved upward like something from a dream, and everywhere I looked there was evidence of wealth that spanned generations. A woman in her 50s appeared from a side hallway, her gray hair pulled into an elegant bun. She looked at me with barely concealed disapproval, then at Randolph with something closer to concern. Sir, the staff is confused about the arrangements, she said carefully. You've never brought a guest to the residence before. They're uncertain about protocol. This is Linda Blair, Randolph said, his hand coming to rest on the small of my back, a gesture of possession that sent electricity up my spine. She'll be staying in the East Wing. Prepare the master guest suite. She'll need a wardrobe, personal items, whatever she requires. Spare no expense. The woman's eyebrows rose fractionally. The East Wing? Sir, that's... I'm aware of what it is, Mrs. Chen. His voice took on an edge of steel. Make the arrangements. Mrs. Chen disappeared with a stiff nod, and I turned to Randolph. What's the East Wing? Connected to my quarters, he said simply, already moving toward the staircase. It's the most secure part of the house. If anyone tries to reach you, they'll have to go through me first. I followed him up the stairs, my legs still weak from blood loss and exhaustion. Your men are going to talk, bringing a woman here, keeping her close. They'll think. Let them think what they want, Randolph interrupted. He led me down a hallway lined with more artwork, more evidence of a world I'd never been part of. My authority isn't dependent on their approval. He stopped at a set of double doors and pushed them open to reveal a suite that took my breath away. The bedroom was massive, decorated in cream and gold, with a 4-poster bed that looked like it belonged to royalty. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the estate's gardens, and a door on the far wall led to what I assumed was a bathroom larger than my old apartment. If you've gotten this far into the story, thank you for staying with Linda through every twist and turn. Before we continue with what happens next, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? What's your reaction to what just happened? I want to hear your theories and thoughts. And please don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to Julia's Romance Library. Your engagement means everything. Thank you. This is too much, I said, stepping into the room like I might break something just by breathing. This is what you need to survive in my world. Randolph moved to the windows, looking out over his domain. Silas will hear that you're here within hours. When he does, he needs to see that you're not some street runner I'm hiding in a basement. You're under my protection, in my home. That sends a message. What message? I asked, moving to stand beside him. He turned to face me. An intensity in his eyes made my breath catch. That you belong to me now. That anyone who touches you answers to me. That Silas Vane made a critical error when he decided to hunt what's mine. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened me, should have sent me running. Instead, it made something dangerous unfurl in my chest, something that felt dangerously close to trust. I'm not your property, I said, but the words came out softer than I intended. No, Randolph agreed, reaching out to cup my jaw with one hand, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. You're my partner, my weapon against Silas, my guest in this house, but to the rest of the world. His eyes darkened. You're mine, and I protect what's mine with everything I have. His hand dropped, and he stepped back, breaking the spell. Mrs. Chun will bring you clothes. Rest. Tonight, we begin planning Silas's downfall. He moved toward the door, then paused at the threshold. There's a door connecting your room to mine. It will remain unlocked from both sides. If you need anything, protection, information, or simply company, you're welcome in my space. The implication hung heavy in the air between us. And if you need anything? I asked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Then I'll know where to find you. He left me alone in the golden room, and I sank onto the edge of the bed, my heart racing. I'd traded one cage for another, but this cage had silk sheets and a man who looked at me like I was worth breaking his most sacred rules. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt something far more dangerous. I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. I found him on the terrace at midnight, silhouetted against the city lights that sprawled below like fallen stars. He stood at the stone balustrade with a tumbler of whiskey in one hand, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up against the autumn chill. The wind carried the scent of tobacco and expensive cologne, mixing with the rain that threatened on the horizon. I'd tried to sleep, failed. The connecting door between our rooms had seemed to pulse with possibility, and finally I'd given in and knocked. When there was no answer, I'd found the door unlocked and his bedroom empty. The terrace had been the next logical place. Couldn't sleep either, I asked, stepping out into the cold. Randolph didn't turn, but I saw his shoulders tense at the sound of my voice. I rarely do. I moved to stand beside him, wrapping my arms around myself. I'd borrowed one of the silk robes Mrs. Chun had provided, but it did little against the bite of wind. For a long moment, we stood in silence, Two people bound by desperation and ledgers filled with blood. You didn't have to do this, I said finally. Break your rules for me. There were other ways to use the information I gave you. No, he said quietly. There weren't. He took a long drink, then set the glass on the balustrade. When he finally looked at me, his eyes held something I hadn't seen before. Something raw and unguarded. Pain, maybe. Or regret. I had a sister, he said, the words falling like stones into still water. Gabriella. She was 22, studying art history at Columbia. She had nothing to do with my world. Nothing to do with the business. I kept her separate, kept her safe. Or so I thought. My breath caught. The past tense wasn't lost on me. 5 years ago, she witnessed something she shouldn't have. A deal going wrong in the wrong place at the wrong time. She saw faces, heard names. One of my rivals found out. His jaw clenched, and I watched him fight for control. They took her, used her as leverage to try to force me into giving up territory. What did you do? I followed the rules, he said, and the bitterness in his voice was acid. The code, the sacred omerta that governs our world. You don't negotiate with kidnappers. You don't show weakness. You make them pay, but you never, ever give them what they want because it sets a precedent. He turned to face me fully, and the anguish in his eyes nearly broke me. I had 3 days to make a decision. 3 days while they held her in some warehouse in Queens. 3 days while my advisors told me that bending would make me look weak, that other families would see it as an opening. If you're still here after that, thank you for riding this dangerous journey with me. Before we push forward, take a moment to drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? What did you think of that scene? Would you have made the same choice? Your thoughts fuel these stories, so don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe. Let's keep building this community together. Thanks. Randolph, I started, but he shook his head. I chose the code over her life. I told myself it was the right decision, that it was what my father would have done, what the family required. That one life couldn't matter more than the integrity of everything we'd built. His voice cracked. They killed her on the 3rd day, left her body on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral with a note that said, "The king sacrifices his queen." The tears came before I could stop them, hot against my cold cheeks. I reached out without thinking, my hand finding his arm. "I'm so sorry. I burned their entire organization to the ground," he continued, his voice flat now, emotionless. "Killed every man who'd been in that warehouse. Destroyed their businesses, their families, their legacies. But it didn't bring her back. Nothing could bring her back." He looked down at my hand on his arm, then covered it with his own. "When you crashed through that window, bleeding and desperate, holding evidence that could start a war, you should have been nothing to me. A complication. A civilian I should have turned away according to the rules I rebuilt my life around after Gabriella died. But you didn't," I whispered. "No." His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. "Because I looked at you and saw someone fighting to survive. Someone the world had chewed up and spit out. Someone who deserved a chance that I failed to give my sister." He pulled me closer, and I went willingly, drawn into the gravity of his grief and determination. "I won't make that mistake again, Linda. I won't choose the code over a life that matters. Not yours. Never yours." The rain began then, soft drops that quickly became a downpour. Neither of us moved. We stood there on the terrace, getting soaked, and I understood finally what I'd really walked into when I'd broken through that glass. This wasn't just about the ledger. This wasn't just about Silas Vane or territory or power. This was about redemption. His and mine both. "She would have liked you," Randolph said softly, brushing wet hair away from my face. "Gabriella. She always believed in second chances, in breaking rules when the rules were wrong." "Then let's break them," I said, rising on my toes so our faces were level. "All of them. For her. For us. For everyone who ever got crushed under the weight of codes that valued power over people. His eyes searched mine in the rain-soaked darkness. Then slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his forehead against mine. Not a kiss. Something more intimate than that. A promise. A vow. "I'll keep you safe," he murmured, "even if it costs me everything." "And I'll help you destroy the man who thinks he can steal from you," I replied, "even if it costs me my life." "It won't," he said with absolute certainty, "because I won't let it." The rain fell harder, but neither of us moved. We stood locked together on that terrace, two broken people building something new from the ruins of what we'd lost. And for the first time since I'd stolen that ledger, I believed I might actually survive this. Not just survive, win. The ballroom in the East Wing had been built for royalty. Chandeliers dripped crystal light across polished floors and mirrors lined the walls, multiplying our reflections into infinity. I stood in the center of it all wearing a dress that cost more than I'd made in a year. Midnight blue silk that hugged every curve before flowing to the floor like water. Randolph circled me slowly, his eyes assessing, critical. He'd traded his usual attire for a full tuxedo, and the sight of him informal was devastating. Every inch the king he was rumored to be. "You're holding yourself like you expect to be hit," he observed. "Shoulders hunched, weight on your back foot, hands ready to defend. In my world, that reads as weakness." "In my world, that's called survival," I shot back. "You're not in that world anymore." He stopped in front of me, so close I could smell the sandalwood and tobacco that clung to him. "In 3 days, you'll walk into the gala at my side. Every crime lord, politician, and power broker in New York will be watching. They'll be looking for cracks, for evidence that you don't belong, for any sign that I'm showing weakness by protecting you." "Maybe you are," I said quietly. His eyes flashed. "Stand up straight." I did, pulling my shoulders back. He shook his head and moved behind me, his hands coming to rest on my shoulders. The touch sent electricity down my spine. "Not like that. You're trying too hard. Power isn't about force, Linda. It's about certainty." His hands slid down my arms, adjusting my posture with gentle pressure. "You need to believe you belong in every room you enter, not because someone gave you permission, but because the room should be grateful you showed up." "That's easy for you to say," I murmured, hyper-aware of his proximity. "You were born into this." "I was born into money," he corrected, his breath warm against my ear. "I earned the power, and now I'm going to teach you how to hold it." His hands found my waist, turning me to face him. "When you walk, you lead with your chest. Head high, eyes forward. You don't scan for threats because nothing in that room is dangerous enough to concern you. Understand?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Show me." I walked across the ballroom, trying to embody everything he'd said. When I reached the far wall and turned back, I found him watching with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Better," he said, "but you're still thinking too much. Stop calculating. Start commanding." He moved to the antique phonograph in the corner and set a record spinning. Jazz filled the space, sultry and slow. "Dance with me." "I don't know how to dance like this," I admitted. "Then learn." He extended his hand, and after a heartbeat of hesitation, I took it. "If you've made it this far, thank you for being here. Before we continue, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love knowing this story is reaching people across the world. Feel free to share your thoughts on Linda and Randolph so far. What would you do in her position? And don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to Julia's Romance Library. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Thank you." Randolph pulled me into his arms with practiced ease, one hand at my waist, the other holding mine. We began to move, and I stumbled immediately. He caught me effortlessly, his grip tightening. "Stop thinking," he murmured. "Feel the music. Feel me. Trust that I won't let you fall." I forced myself to relax, to let him lead. Slowly we found a rhythm. His hand splayed across my lower back, burning through the silk. Our bodies moved together like we'd done this 1,000 times, and I realized this wasn't just about dancing. This was about control, about trust, about learning to move through his world with the same lethal grace he possessed. "When Silas sees you at the gala," Randolph said, his voice low and intimate, "he needs to see someone untouchable. Someone who stands beside me not as a victim I'm protecting, but as an equal I've chosen." He spun me out and pulled me back, and I gasped as my body collided with his. "He needs to see a queen." "I'm not a queen," I whispered, looking up at him. "No," he agreed, his dark eyes holding mine. "Not yet, but you will be." His hand came up to cup my face, thumb tracing my bottom lip. The music swelled around us, and the air between us crackled with something dangerous, something inevitable. "Randolph," I started, but he shook his head. "You need to understand something, Linda. When you walk into that gala at my side, you're not just making a statement about Silas. You're making a statement about us, about what you are to me." His forehead pressed against mine, and my breath caught. "Every man in that room will want you. Every woman will envy you, and everyone will know that you're mine. What am I to you?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the music. He was silent for a long moment, and I watched something more in his eyes. Then slowly, deliberately, he closed the distance between us until our lips were a breath apart. "Everything I shouldn't want," he murmured. "Everything I can't afford to need. Everything I'm willing to burn my entire empire down to protect." "Then teach me," I breathed. "Teach me how to be worthy of that." His lips curved into something dark and promising. "Oh, Linda, you already are." The music played on, and we danced in the empty ballroom like two people balanced on the edge of a knife. In 3 days, we would face Silas Vane and the entire underworld. We would play our parts, execute our plan, and gamble everything on a single perfect move. But tonight, in this moment, with his arms around me and my heart racing against his chest, I wasn't thinking about war or ledgers or survival. I was thinking about how easy it would be to fall for a man like Randolph Benitez. How terrifying, how inevitable, and how absolutely, catastrophically worth it. The phone call came at 3 in the morning. I woke to the sound of Randolph's voice through the connecting door, sharp and lethal in a way I hadn't heard since that first night. I pulled on a robe and found him in his study, still dressed despite the hour, his phone pressed to his ear and murder in his eyes. "How many?" he demanded. A pause. "And the drivers?" Another pause, longer this time. His jaw clenched so hard I thought it might shatter. "Bring me whoever's left alive. I don't care what condition they're in." He ended the call and hurled the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall, pieces raining down onto the Persian rug. For a moment, he just stood there, hands braced on his desk, breathing hard. "What happened?" I asked from the doorway. His head snapped up, and the look in his eyes made me take an involuntary step back. But then he seemed to see me, really see me, and some of the rage bled away, replaced by something colder, more dangerous. Silas hit one of my shipments, the warehouse in Red Hook. 3 trucks, 2 million in merchandise, and 5 of my men. His voice was flat, emotionless, which somehow made it worse. 4 are dead. One's in critical condition at a hospital we control. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Because of me. Because of him, Randolph corrected sharply. He moved around the desk and crossed to me in 3 strides. "This is what Silas does. He escalates. He destroys. He takes what isn't his and leaves scorched earth behind." "But he's doing it to send you a message," I insisted, guilt clawing at my throat. "He's showing you what it costs to protect me. 4 men are dead because I crashed into your bar. 4 men are dead because Silas Vane is a rabid dog who needs to be put down." Randolph's hands came to my shoulders, gripping firmly. "Don't you dare take responsibility for his violence. That's what he wants. He wants you feeling guilty enough to turn yourself over. Wants me angry enough to make a mistake. What kind of mistake? The kind where I storm his territory and start a war that costs more lives than necessary. He released me and moved to the bar, pouring whiskey with shaking hands. The first time I'd seen him anything less than perfectly controlled. But he left something at the warehouse. A calling card. He pulled a piece of paper from his jacket pocket and handed it to me. The message was written in blood, the letters crude but unmistakable. Return what you stole, Benitez. Or I'll take everything you love, starting with the whore hiding in your bed. The vulgarity of it hit me like a physical blow. But worse was the implication. Silas knew where I was, knew what I was becoming to Randolph. He has people inside your organization, I said quietly. Not for long. Randolph downed the whiskey in one swallow. I've suspected a leak for weeks. This confirms it. Someone told him you were here. Someone gave him the shipment route. Someone is going to die very slowly when I find them. If you're still with me at this point, thank you for investing in Linda's journey. Before we dive deeper, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what you think of the chemistry between these two. Are you Team Randolph, or do you think Linda should run while she still can? Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe. Every subscriber tells me these stories matter. Thanks for being part of this. I moved to stand beside him, taking the glass from his hand and setting it aside. What are you going to do? What I should have done the moment you told me about the ledger. He turned to face me, and the decision in his eyes was absolute. I'm going to destroy him. Not slowly, not carefully, not according to the rules of engagement that have governed this city for decades. His hand came up to cut my face. I'm going to end Silas Vane publicly, decisively, and in a way that ensures no one ever questions my protection again. The gala, I whispered. The gala, he confirmed. I was going to use it to make a statement, to show you at my side and dare him to object. But that's not enough anymore. He's drawn blood, killed my men, threatened you. His thumb traced my cheekbone. He's made this personal. It was always personal, I said, from the moment I broke through your window. No, his eyes held mine. It became personal the moment I decided you were worth breaking every rule I've ever lived by, worth risking everything I've built, worth starting a war that will reshape this entire city. The weight of that confession settled between us like a living thing. For men had died tonight because Silas refused to let go. How many more would die before this ended? I should leave, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew I didn't mean them. Disappear. Take the ledger and run somewhere he'll never find me. It would stop all of this. It would accomplish nothing, Randolph interrupted. Silas would still come after me for harboring you, would still see it as weakness, and you'd spend the rest of your life running, always looking over your shoulder, never safe. His forehead pressed against mine. No, we end this, together, at the gala in 2 days. How? A dark smile curved his lips. By giving him exactly what he wants. A public confrontation. A chance to reclaim his property in front of the entire underworld. His hand slid to the back of my neck, possessive and protective. And when he reaches for you, I'll show everyone what happens to men who touch what belongs to me. You're going to kill him, I said. Not a question. I'm going to execute him, he corrected. There's a difference. One is murder. The other is a statement. I should have been horrified, should have pulled away from this man who spoke of execution with the same casual certainty most people discussed dinner plans. But I wasn't, because I'd seen what Silas did to people, had lived under his cruelty for years, had stolen that ledger knowing it might cost me my life. What do you need me to do? I asked. Randolph's eyes blazed with something fierce and proud. Be brave. Be beautiful. Be exactly who you are. And when the moment comes, Trust that I will keep my promise. His lips brushed my forehead. No one takes what's mine, not even God himself. The Grand Astor Ballroom glittered like the inside of a jewel box. Chandeliers cast golden light across marble floors where New York's most dangerous elite moved in careful circles, their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos hiding the weapons everyone knew they carried. Politicians mingled with crime lords. Judges clinked champagne glasses with money launderers. This was the heart of the city's true power, and I was about to walk into it on the arm of its most feared king. "Ready?" Randolph asked, his hand steady at the small of my back. I looked at him and felt my breath catch despite having seen him informal where before. Tonight he wore a black tuxedo that had been tailored to perfection, his bow tie undone in a way that suggested casual dominance. His dark hair was swept back, and those obsidian eyes held a predatory focus that made several nearby guests step aside instinctively. "No," I admitted, "but let's do it anyway." The dress he'd chosen for me was a masterpiece of midnight red silk that clung to every curve before pooling at my feet. The neckline plunged low enough to be daring. The back was entirely open and diamonds, real ones, dripped from my throat and ears. My hair had been swept up in an elegant twist, and the makeup artist had transformed me into someone who looked like she belonged in this world. I looked like a queen. His queen. We descended the grand staircase together, and the effect was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. I felt 100 pairs of eyes assessing, judging, calculating what my presence meant. Randolph's hand tightened possessively on my waist. "Breathe," he murmured. "And remember, you don't ask for their approval. They should be honored you're here." I lifted my chin and swept my gaze across the crowd with the same cold assessment they'd given me. Several people looked away first. A small victory, but I'd take it. Benitez. A barrel-chested man with silver hair approached, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Quite the surprise guest. I wasn't aware you were bringing a companion tonight." "Carmine." Randolph's tone was pleasant, lethal. "Allow me to introduce Linda Blair. She's under my protection." The word protection rippled through the nearby guests like a stone thrown into still water. In this world, that word carried weight. It meant untouchable. It meant anyone who harmed me would answer to Randolph personally. "Charming," Carmine said, but his eyes held calculation. "And what, may I ask, does Miss Blair do to warrant such comprehensive security?" "She exists," Randolph said simply. "That's enough." We moved deeper into the ballroom, and I felt the weight of scrutiny following us. Randolph introduced me to senators and syndicate bosses, to shipping magnates and underground bankers. Each time he kept his hand on me, my waist, my lower back, the curve of my hip, a constant claiming, a public statement that I was his. And with each introduction, I felt the power he'd been teaching me settle into my bones. I met their gazes without flinching, smiled with just enough warmth to be polite and enough ice to keep them at distance. Spoke, when spoken to with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she stood. If you've gotten this far into the story, thank you for staying with Linda through every twist and turn. Before we continue with what happens next, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? What's your reaction to what just happened? I want to hear your theories and thoughts. And please don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to Julia's Romance Library. Your engagement means everything. Thank you. "You're doing perfectly," Randolph murmured as we paused near the bar. "Half the room wants you. The other half wants to be you." "And Silas?" I asked quietly, watching from the shadows. His eyes flicked to the entrance of the ballroom. He arrived 10 minutes ago, standing near the east colonnade with 3 of his men. He's been staring at you since we walked in. My spine stiffened, but I didn't turn to look. "What do?" "We dance." Randolph took my hand and led me to the center of the ballroom where other couples moved to the orchestra's soaring waltz. We show him exactly what he's lost, what he'll never have, what trying to reclaim will cost him everything. His arms slid around my waist, and we began to move. The lessons from the estate paid off now. I followed his lead effortlessly, our bodies moving together like we'd been dancing for years instead of days. Around us, other couples cleared space, and I realized we'd become the center of attention. "He's moving," Randolph said against my ear. "Coming toward us. When he reaches us, stay close to me. No matter what he says, no matter what he threatens, you stay by my side." "I'm not going anywhere," I promised. The music swelled, and Randolph spun me out and back in a move that was pure showmanship. When I came back into his arms, I was facing the edge of the dance floor where Silas Vane stood watching with eyes full of rage and hunger. He looked exactly as I remembered, tall and whip-thin, with a face like a switchblade and eyes that held no warmth. He wore an expensive suit that couldn't hide the violence coiled beneath his skin. 3 men flanked him, all with hands positioned near weapons. "Linda!" Silas's voice cut across the music, sharp and possessive. "It's time to come home." The ballroom went silent. The orchestra stuttered to a stop. Everyone turned to watch what would happen next. And I realized this was it. The moment Randolph had orchestrated. The trap he'd baited with my presence. Silas had taken the bait, and now he would pay for it. Randolph stopped dancing, but kept me locked against his side. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent ballroom with the weight of absolute authority. "She is home," he said. "And you, Silas Vane, have made a critical mistake." Silas stepped onto the dance floor, his thin lips curving into a smile that had nothing to do with humor. "You've made a mistake, Benitez. That woman stole from me. She belongs to me. And no matter whose bed she's warming now, she's coming back to pay her debts." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt Randolph's body tense against mine, coiled like a snake about to strike. But his voice remained perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. "She belongs to no one but herself," Randolph said. "And she's under my protection, which means your claim ends here." "Protection?" Silas laughed, the sound grating and ugly. "You can't protect her from consequences. She stole my ledger, killed 2 of my men. That's blood debt, and we both know what that means." "I know what it meant," Randolph corrected. "Past tense." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Are you really going to break the oldest rule of the syndicate over some street-level collection girl? This is neutral ground, Benitez. The gala has been sacred territory for 70 years. No violence, no executions, no blood on these floors." He spread his arms, confident in his safety. "Everyone here knows the code. Even you have to respect it." "Do I?" Randolph's tone was conversational, almost curious. He released me gently, putting me behind him with a subtle push. "Tell me, Silas, do you know why the code exists? To maintain order, to keep the families from tearing each other apart over petty grievances." "Close." Randolph began to unbutton his jacket, the movement casual and terrifying. "The code exists because men like my grandfather believed that there were rules worth following, lines that shouldn't be crossed, civilians who should be kept separate from our world." He shrugged off the jacket and handed it to a nearby server who took it with shaking hands. "But you crossed those lines, didn't you? You hunted a woman through the streets. You sent killers after someone who'd never sworn an oath to your organization. You killed 4 of my men and sent me a message written in their blood." "Business," Silas said, but something flickered in his eyes. "Uncertainty. You know how this works. She interfered with my operations. She escaped your cruelty." Randolph's voice hardened. "And you made it personal when you called her a whore. When you threatened to take everything I love. When you forgot that some rules matter more than others." The ballroom was silent as a grave. I saw other syndicate leaders watching with rapt attention, saw politicians backing toward exits, saw Silas's own men beginning to shift uncomfortably. "You can't touch me," Silas said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Not here. Not now. The consequences will be mine to bear." Randolph reached behind his back and drew his gun, that silver masterpiece that had been pointed at my heart a week ago. "I'm willing to accept them. If you're still here after that, thank you for riding this dangerous journey with me. Before we push forward to the next chapter, take a moment to drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? What did you think of that scene? Would you have made the same choice? Your thoughts fuel these stories, so don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe. Let's keep building this community together. Thanks. Benitez, one of the older syndicate leaders, called out. "Think about what you're doing. If you break the code here in front of everyone, the families will demand retribution. You'll start a war." "Then let there be war," Randolph said simply. He raised the gun, and Silas stumbled backward. "I'm tired of codes written by dead men who never had to choose between rules and the people they love. I'm tired of systems that protect predators like him, while women like her have to steal ledgers just to survive." "You're insane," Silas hissed. "You'll lose everything." "I've already lost everything that mattered once." Randolph's eyes found mine briefly, and I saw Gabriella's ghost in them. "I won't make that mistake again." Silas made his move then, reached for his own weapon in a desperate bid for survival. But Randolph was faster. The shot rang out like thunder in the silent ballroom, and Silas dropped to the marble floor, a red stain blooming across his white shirt. He gasped once, twice, then went still. The silence that followed was absolute. 200 of the most powerful people in New York stood frozen, witnessing what should have been impossible. Randolph Benitez, the man who'd built his empire on order and codes and unwavering discipline, had just executed someone on neutral ground in front of the entire syndicate. He'd broken the most sacred rule, and he'd done it for me. Randolph lowered the gun slowly, his eyes sweeping the crowd with deadly calm. "Let this be a lesson," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "I will honor the codes that deserve honor. I will respect the rules that serve justice. But I will not." His voice rose, commanding absolute. "I will not allow any code, any rule, any tradition to protect men who prey on the innocent. Anyone who has a problem with that can address it with me directly." No one spoke. No one moved. The most powerful crime lords in the city simply stood there, watching as Randolph holstered his weapon and turned back to me. He crossed the dance floor, his shoes clicking against marble stained with Silas's blood, and took my hand with infinite gentleness. "We're leaving," he said quietly. Then, louder, addressing the crowd, "The gala continues. Enjoy your evening." He led me past Silas's body, past the shocked faces of senators and syndicate leaders, past the orchestra that had forgotten how to play. We walked out of that ballroom like royalty leaving their coronation, and not a single person tried to stop us. Because in that moment, Randolph Benitez had redefined what power meant in this city. And I was the woman standing at his side when he did it. The woman he'd broken every rule to save. The woman who'd just become his queen in the most violent, public, undeniable way possible. The city sprawled beneath us like a kingdom of lights, millions of lives flickering in the darkness. We stood on the terrace of Randolph's estate, the same place where he'd told me about Gabriella, where the rain had washed away our old selves and left something new in their place. Tonight, the sky was clear, and the autumn wind carried the scent of change. Randolph had been silent since we'd left the gala. His men had surrounded us during the drive home, a protective phalanx that spoke to the seriousness of what he'd done. Breaking the code wouldn't go unanswered. The families would demand accountability. There would be consequences, retaliation, perhaps even war. But standing here beside him, watching the city breathe, I couldn't bring myself to regret a single moment. "They'll come for you," I said quietly. The other families. The old guard who think you've committed sacrilege. Let them come. He took a sip of whiskey, his profile sharp against the night sky. I've spent 15 years building power on foundations laid by men who valued tradition over humanity. Tonight, I burned those foundations to ash. For me, I whispered. For us. He turned to face me, and the intensity in his eyes stole my breath. For everyone who's ever been crushed under the weight of codes that protect the powerful and sacrifice the vulnerable. For Gabriella. For you. For whoever comes next. I moved to stand beside him at the balustrade, our shoulders touching. Below, the city pulsed with life. People who had no idea their underworld had been fundamentally reshaped tonight. That the king they'd feared had just declared that some things mattered more than power. I should leave, I said, testing the words, even though I knew I didn't mean them. Disappear before the retaliation starts. You could tell them I forced your hand, that I manipulated you. Stop. His hand found mine, fingers lacing together. You're not running. Not anymore. Not ever again. Randolph. The last time I let someone I cared about face danger alone, she died on the steps of a cathedral. His voice was raw, stripped of all the careful control that usually governed it. I won't survive losing you too. I won't survive becoming the man I was before you crashed through that window, empty, hollow, ruling an empire I didn't even believe in anymore. Tears blurred my vision. What if staying with you gets me killed? Gets us both killed? Then we die together on this balcony, overlooking a city we tried to make better. He pulled me closer, and I went willingly, fitting against his body like I'd been made for this exact space. But I don't think we will. I think we're going to survive this. Build something new from the ruins. Rewrite every rule that needs rewriting. A new empire, I murmured against his chest. A better one. His hand came up to tilt my face toward his. With you as my equal, my partner, my queen. The word hung between us, heavy with promise and possibility. Queen, not a possession, not a victim he was protecting. An equal who'd stand beside him while they rebuilt the underworld according to principles that actually mattered. I've never wanted power, I admitted. I just wanted to survive. And now, Randolph's thumb traced my cheekbone with infinite tenderness. Now I want to change things. The realization settled into my bones with the weight of truth. I want to make sure no other woman has to steal ledgers and run through rain-soaked streets just to escape a predator. I want to use everything in that ledger. All of Silas's contacts, his operations, his dirty money, and dismantle the systems that made men like him possible in the first place. Randolph smiled, and it transformed his face from austere king to something achingly human. Then, that's exactly what we'll do. Together. He kissed me then, finally, inevitably. His lips claimed mine with a gentleness that contradicted everything I knew about him. And I kissed him back with all the desperation and hope and fierce determination that had kept me alive through hell. This wasn't just passion. It was a promise. A vow sealed with breath and touch, and the absolute certainty that whatever came next, we would face it as one. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to mine. Welcome home, Linda Blair. Welcome to your new reign. I looked out over the city again, seeing it differently now. Not as a place that had chewed me up and tried to spit me out, but as something I could shape. Something we could shape together. The families will retaliate, I said practically. They'll try to use the code breaking against you. Try to diminish your authority. Let them try. Randolph's arm tightened around my waist. I have something they don't. I have the truth. I have the ledger. And I have you, a woman brave enough to steal from a monster and brilliant enough to survive long enough to bring him down. We brought him down, I corrected. We did. He raised his glass toward the city, and I took it from him, taking a sip of the expensive whiskey that no longer tasted foreign. To new rules, to broken codes, to building something worthy of the people it governs. To us, I added, handing the glass back. To us, he agreed. We stood there on the terrace as dawn began to paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Two people who'd found each other in the most violent, impossible circumstances. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, threats, battles fought in boardrooms and back alleys alike. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't running. I was standing still, standing strong, standing beside a man who'd burned his entire world down to keep me safe. I was home. I was powerful. I was free. And the city below us would never be the same. Thank you for journeying with Linda and Randolph through the Gilded Cage. If this story moved you, please subscribe to Julia's Romance Library for more tales of love, power, and the courage it takes to break all the rules.